That's good. Frank Fritz's garage and collection were unique, but what transpired following his death shocked everyone, including the police. When they unlocked his garage, they found more than vintage cars, a dusty, secret car, despite official records an automobile exists. Why was it there? Why did Frank leave a handwritten message suggesting more than a hidden gem? The instant everything changed. What they found in Frank Fritz's garage is very unexpected. Obsession that propelled him. Frank Fritz hunted and collected vehicles. He sought for steel and chrome stories, tracing past decades from rust. From his first appearance on American Pickers, Frank was clearly not in it for the fame. The chase was his goal. His affection for old things was great. Nothing spoke louder to him than a classic car with a story. Cream. The average viewer saw Frank as the quieter one with the quick wit and endless knowledge of gas stations, signage, and oil cans. But those who watched attentively observed the genuine fixation, the way his voice changed when he saw a muscle car half buried in weeds or spent a little longer in someone's dusty garage. If a rare model was parked inside, Frank bought more than cars. He recognized something redeemable in them. With care, his private collection grew over time. His goal wasn't to impress. A garage in Iowa held time capsule-like machinery with no showroom or velvet ropes. He always appreciated the elegant lines and tail fins of a 1956 Chevrolet Bel Air. He refurbished his $7,000 1967 Ford Fairlane GT 390, repairing it for $4,000 more. The 1960 Cadillac Fleetwood he bought with his old friend Mike Wolfe was completely loaded, but it continued. Frank was willing to spend much on exceptional projects. He purchased two 1954 Nash Healey sports cars for $46,000. Mears Cycle followed in 1914. Unusual three-wheeler from another planet worth $35,000. His prized possession? 1947 Cisitalia Nervolare Spider. An Italian post-war classic, lightweight, quick, and very rare. It was his hidden treasures crown diamond, worth over $500,000. All the cars had stories, and Frank recalled them. He could tell you how he got it, what it meant to him, and why it deserved a second life, whether it was a barn find, long-haul tow, or late-night internet auction win. Those weren't his investments, rescue missions. They showed that history mattered. Frank was special because he never allowed success influence his view of these goods. He never had an Instagram empire or expensive open houses to showcase his collection. Most people couldn't enter his garage, a refuge of dust, oil, and veneration. He occasionally spent hours down there working with ancient parts, organizing his collection, or just sitting quietly with his favorite cars, according to friends. Something intimate about that. Frank locked up his most valuable treasures in a world where everything is shared and commercialized. Thus begins the mystery, because not everything he uncovered was filmed. Not all deals were public. Frank became more reclusive and isolated, and his garage, once a symbol of his enthusiasm, changed. None of his loved ones knew what was within. After his death, the locks were broken and the massive doors opened, and what they found altered everything. Before we get there, we must understand Frank's passion and why some argue it wasn't about money or vehicle. It showed that some things are worth keeping even if most people forget about them. Last years of the collector. Public perception of Frank's world faded as his appearance on American Pickers did. A gradual withdrawal became irreversible. Frank discreetly left the show in 2020, citing back surgery and health difficulties. Fans thought he'd recover. However, things were unraveling behind the scenes. The health setback wasn't transitory. A bigger decline would darken his latter years. Frank got more secluded, according to friends. He cut back on calls and visits and spent most of his time at home. That residence wasn't typical. It was living history. His garage, which had always been a site of restoration and purpose, became quieter and more enigmatic. He rarely talked about what was inside, and even his closest friends hadn't gone inside for years. There were public glimpses. A Facebook photo of his 1939 Plymouth Coup with a comment expressing his pride. Another post about restoring the Ford Fairlane's growl when it ran again. Soon, the posts and updates stopped. As his health declined, the garage doors remained closed. The collection grew nevertheless. Frank kept buying cars after the show ended. Sometimes he had an intermediary check out a car. Sometimes he bought blind. It was instinct, not recklessness. After decades of practice, he knew what to look for. Every purchase was intentional. A vehicle few people recognized was one of the last verified acquisitions. Without chrome or muscle, it was plain. Strange shape, faded paint, and unclear markings. Frank replied to a neighbor's question, "It's older than you think," then rolled it into the garage and locked the door. This was over a year before his death. Philosophy set Frank apart from other collectors. He avoided trends. He didn't hoard for quantity. He sought purpose. All that made his latter years mysterious. What was he chasing if he kept collecting when unwell and alone? Rumors circulated. One claimed a hidden collection of American automotive myths, one-off prototypes, race cars that disappeared, and incomplete projects. Another reported he was talking with a former GM employee who claimed to have a 1960s factory car. No confirmation, only antique auto community murmurs. But this is established. Frank made several mysterious remarks to longtime friends before his death. He remarked that garage has something that would outlast us. He reportedly urged someone to tell them I left everything behind if they opened the garage without me. It was ignored at the time. Frank was always poetic. The ending was quiet, silence, no farewell or news release. Among seclusion and undiscovered stories, a man who once lit up screens nationwide died. As the legal procedure began and estate handlers and detectives took his possessions, all eyes were on the one area that had remained unchanged, his sealed garage, quiet, unattended. What he left behind wasn't simply cars. It chronicled a life spent seeking the uncommon, forgotten, and unbelievable. And as the key turned and the doors creaked open for the first time in years, those closest to the case would know that Frank had never ceased chasing the impossible. He had grabbed and hidden it in plain sight. The garage was off limits. When they unlocked Frank Fritz's garage, the silence seemed unsettling. Not the courteous sort you hear at a memorial, but the kind that seeps in when people understand they're entering something new. The police stood at the gravel driveway edge, hands on their belts, exchanging hushed looks. The estate attorney had the key. Hidden behind that massive roll-up door were years of secrets. The garage had been sealed by court order until then. Inventorying personal assets, proving ownership, and preserving treasures throughout probate were part of the procedure. No one anticipated the outcome. The garage seemed small from the outside, weathered steel frame with ivy borders. The side door was dented and hadn't been opened in a decade. However, once the main door was lifted, dust and a legacy streamed out like smoke. There were 8 tightly parked cars, some covered in old tarps, some exposed, their paint faded but their form striking. With its turquoise body faded but intact, the 1956 Bel Air stood triumphantly toward the front. Next to it, Frank's cherished 1967 Fairlane GT 390 muscle vehicle. The chrome-plated Cadillac Fleetwood occupied the back left corner. A time-frozen museum. But there was more, unrecognizable vehicle. A vehicle not on Frank's roster was parked sideways against the back wall under an oil-stained gray tarp. Odd form, low, aggressively curved, exceptionally wide rear. It appeared to be a racing shell or prototype. A policeman gently removed the tarp. Then things changed. There was no previous sighting of this Corvette. This Stingray had more aggressive lines. The body appeared handmade and experimental. The nose was too low and the back was too wide. Most notable was the lack of VIN plates in typical locations. Instead, there was a little brass badge glued to the firewall with faded lettering and an odd number sequence that didn't match any GM record. Officers reported it. The counsel noted, no one touched the truck after that, but they continued looking at it. It felt wrong. A handwritten message was placed above the workbench on the garage wall, barely visible behind years of grime. The message was readable despite yellowing paper and ink bleeds. I left everything there. Frank. Though it didn't explain everything, it felt purposeful, like a final hint he intended someone to find. Later, the mystery Corvette's existence was denied by a local mechanic who assessed the automobiles. Stated, in addition to the 5 officially produced, there was one more or something like it. For unknown reasons, Frank buried it under a tarp in the back of his secret refuge. Questions arose. How did he obtain it? Where did it originate? Why didn't he tell anyone? Nobody could touch the garage, which revealed its first secret. That wouldn't be the last. Frank's legacy was a challenge, not just a mystery. one that attracts experts, collectors, and doubters, all attempting to figure out how a man who spent his life sifting through the forgotten would have found something America's major automakers intended to hide. That automobile shouldn't exist. When the garage door heaved open and dust settled, no one expected anything unusual. Frank Fritz had exquisite cars such as the 1956 Chevrolet Bel Air, 1967 Fairlane GT 390, 1954 Nash Healey's, and the Sicilian Nuvolari Spider. Fans, collectors, and magazines had recorded these quantities over time. They were surprised by the quiet anomaly behind a faded tarp in the garage back. They uncovered an unreal vehicle in Frank Fritz's garage after his death. A familiar, odd shape. Fiberglass body, low-profile, exaggerated fenders, clearly a Corvette, but unlike any auction or museum model. When they removed the tarp, confusion increased. Reports said the bodywork resembled a 1963 Grand Sport, a race-bred Corvette that Chevrolet only manufactured 5 of before the project was canceled. All 5 were present. If the reports are true, this one was probably sitting quietly in Frank's collection. No announcement, documentation, or explanation. There was no VIN, only a little metal plate hand-stamped with cryptic numbers and experimental use only. It seemed homemade. Fiberglass looked right, the chassis unlisted. As they inspected it, it became evident. Every official record says this car shouldn't exist. Frank never mentioned it, not in interviews, episodes, or passing. He'd shared his discoveries for decades. But he kept this one for himself softly, intentionally. He noticed the writing on the wall over his workbench. In his aged and somewhat smudged handwriting, he wrote, "I left everything there." After this finding, it read like a riddle rather than an emotional goodbye. The automobile raised concerns and unnerved the crowd. How about a Corvette without a production history, a prototype body with a lost trail, and a meticulous collector? The consequences were severe. There were rumors that it was one of the Grand Sport's missing mules, test cars constructed at the same time, but never issued. Others said it was a one-of-a-kind constructed secretly by engineers with access to the molds. Buried for decades before reaching Frank, Frank clearly knew his assets. It was secured, never registered, never shared, and kept in the darkest corner of his garage. Not as a display piece, but as a waiting item. After his death, it was discovered. A car that shouldn't exist quietly emerged from a life devoted chasing the unusual and astonishing finding, starting a chain reaction. Corvette historians and specialists crowded forums. GM was silent. Different theories collided. Some called it the best reproduction ever. Others thought it may change Corvette history. One thing they agreed: Frank maintained this car's identity a secret until his death. This find was amazing not because of the cash value or brand. It was impossible. A guy who found lost treasures left one final mystery. 4 wheels, a brass tag, and a sealed garage housing a secret that should never have made it this far. No television crews, no headlines. Questions remaining. The car finding sparked more than curiosity. Not even Frank Fritz's closest friends were equipped to answer the many questions it raised. It went beyond the automobile. It was about why it was concealed, how it got to Frank's garage, and if it was meant to be found. After the item appeared in specialty automotive forums, attention spread beyond automobile enthusiasts. Vintage racing communities analyzed each photo. Corvette historians compared it to every Grand Sport prototype, mule car, and early development drawing. However, each response prompted more questions. The main question was this car real? Frank may have obtained an unrecorded Grand Sport prototype from General Motors. Even if it was a replica or Frankenstein built from plans or stolen manufacturing parts, it raised more questions. Who built it? The work was professional. Every angle, contour, and weld revealed a narrative. Someone who knew what they were doing had fingerprints. Next came rumors. Frank reportedly obtained the shell and pieces from a retired GM engineer in the early 2000s, before his health declined. A Flint, Michigan estate sale back channel buyer claims he got it, near former GM grounds. No one could validate these reports, yet they kept coming back. It resembled Frank's. He never sought praise as a collector. He liked the unnoticed and hidden. This garage was never curated like a museum. No. As a workshop and retreat, it was ideal for burying anything like this. People were particularly uneasy about the silence after the automobile. GM wouldn't comment. When asked, a representative replied they had no information of such a vehicle. Even so, veteran engineers and mechanics whispered that more Grand Sports may have been manufactured than officially reported, maybe stashed for testing and secretly scattered after the program ended. Frank's car may have been one of those, leaking a story that was never meant to be told. A note appeared again. I left everything there. People stared at it longer and it felt like a deliberate breadcrumb. Frank may have anticipated the firestorm. Perhaps he was passing the story on to ensure its continuation. Maybe it was his last prank. A final nod from a man who loved finding something uncommon. As word spread, offers poured in. Museums wanted it. Individual collectors offered to acquire it without provenance. The estate declined a blank check from an international bidder. The automobile is still in legal limbo with specialists and attorneys unable to agree on its identity. And Frank, while living, he never mentioned it. That quiet remains. Every interview and episode he taped has no remark, hint, or inadvertent glance. He hid it because he wanted to. Whether it's a forgotten prototype, a factory ghost, or the greatest automotive prank ever, the truth is locked up like the garage. It's possible Frank wanted that. Not everything he found needed explanation. Some things were meant to be found. Legacy and steel and silence, the car remained where it was found after the garage was cataloged and estate processes commenced. Unmissable, silent. Each new expert was more curious than the last, but no one could decide. Too many variables. Too few answers. Frank wasn't around to explain. This story differs because of that. It goes beyond a rare automobile. It's about the man who hid it and his mystery. Frank Fritz lived differently from collectors, not a headline hoarder or value bragger. He collected for the excitement of the find and the quiet satisfaction of saving something most people would have missed. Frank's final discovery, a vanished big sport or a unique recreation, encapsulated everything he stood for: history, mystery, and reverence for lost beauty. He didn't inform anyone since maybe that wasn't the goal. Maybe he wasn't expecting praise. Perhaps he was content knowing it was safe, watching for someone to notice it. He died leaving more than items. His legacy was questions. He taught that collecting isn't necessarily about showing off. No, it exists and keep it where it belongs. That car, the one that shouldn't exist, is part of that tradition. It carries Frank's essence more than any recorded antiquity, whether it's verified or kept a mystery. Because ultimately, it wasn't about proving anything, preserving anything without an audience. Just a shut door, a dirty garage, and a man who knew silence's power. What did you love about Frank Fritz? Share in the comments. The